Tales have been told by storytellers since long before they were ever etched onto a stone tablet or parchment paper. Many tales share similar themes or attributes, as a story is passed down from one storyteller to the next. After a long day of laboring, sit back and relax. Let the world fade into darkness and enjoy another bedtime story with the Abyss. Tonight's tale is a Jewish folk tale, the tale of the Beggar King. Proud King Hagag sat upon his throne in all of his royal splendor, and the high priest standing by his side read from the holy book, as was his daily custom. He read these words, "For riches are not forever, and does the crown endure to every generation?" "Cease!" cried the king. "Who wrote these words?" "They are the words of the holy book," answered the high priest. "Give me the book," commanded the king. With trembling hands, the high priest placed it before his majesty. King Hagag gazed earnestly at the words that had been read, and he frowned. Raising his hand, he tore the page from the book and threw it to the ground. "I, Hagag, am king," he said, "and all such passages that offend me shall be torn out." He flung the volume angrily from him, while the high priest and all of his attendants looked on in astonishment. Have you ever been upset by something that you heard or read? Some people find it easier to get rid of what they do not agree with. As a king, Hagag thought that he had ultimate power. If he did not like something, by his word, it would be gone. How would you react if you had the power of royalty? The king stood up from his throne. "I have heard enough for today. Too long have I delayed my hunting expedition. Get the horses ready." Hagag descended from the throne, stalked haughtily past the trembling figure of the high priest, and went to the hunt. Soon he was riding furiously across an open plain toward a forest where wild stag had been seen. A trumpet sounded the signal that the deer had been driven from its hiding place, and the king urged his horse forward to be the first in the chase. His majesty's steed was the swiftest in the land. Quickly it carried him out of the sight of his nobles and attendants. But the deer was surprisingly fast, and the king could not catch up with it. Coming to a river, the animal plunged in and swam across. Scrambling up the opposite bank, its antlers caught in the branch of a tree, and the king, arriving at the river, gave a cry of joy. "Now I have thee," he said. Springing from his horse and divesting himself of his clothing, he swam across with nothing but a sword. As he reached the opposite bank, however, the deer freed itself from the tree and plunged into a thicket. The king, with his sword in hand, followed quickly, but no deer was seen. Instead, he found lying on the ground beyond the thicket a beautiful youth clad in a deerskin. He was panting as if after a long run. The king stood still in surprise, and the youth sprang to his feet. "I am the deer," he said. "I am a genie, and I have lured you to this spot, proud king, to teach you a lesson for the words that you spoke this morning." Before King Hagag could recover from his surprise, the youth ran back to the river and swam across. Quickly, he dressed himself in the king's clothes and mounted the king's horse just as the other hunters came up. They thought the genie was King Hagag, and they halted before him. "Let us return," said the genie. "The deer has crossed the river and has escaped." King Hagag, from the thicket on the opposite side, watched them ride away, and then flung himself on the ground and wept bitterly. Stories have been often told of people going from rags to riches, stories of fairy godmothers who grant wishes. It is important that you understand that the genie cast no spell. By the king's own hand, he disrobed himself. By his own words, the king cursed himself. How would you react if in mere seconds, every aspect of your life that you knew was gone? The king laid in the thicket until a woodcutter found him. "What are you doing here?" asked the man. "I am King Hagag," returned the monarch. "Thou art a fool," said the woodcutter. Thou art a lazy good-for-nothing to talk so. Come, carry my bundle of sticks, and I will give you food and an old garment." In vain the king protested. The woodcutter only laughed more, and at last, losing patience, he beat him and drove him away. Tired and hungry, and clad only in the rags which the woodcutter had given him, King Hagrid reached the palace late at night. "I am King Hagrid," he said to the guards. But they paid him no mind, and after spending a wretched night in the streets of the city, His Majesty the next morning was glad to accept some bread and milk offered to him by a poor old woman who took pity on him. He stood at a street corner, not knowing what to do. Little children teased him. Others took him for a beggar and offered him money. Later in the day he saw the genie ride through the streets on his horse. All the people bowed down before him and cried, "Long live the king!" "Woe is me," cried Hagrid in his wretchedness. "I am punished for my sin in scoffing at the words of the holy book." He saw that it would be useless for him to go to the palace again, and he went into the fields and tried to earn his bread as a laborer. He was not used to work. However, if it had not been for the kindness of the very poorest, he would have died of starvation. He wandered miserably from place to place until he fell in with some blind beggars who had been deserted by their guide. Joyfully he accepted their offer to take the guide's place. Months rolled by, and one morning the royal heralds went forth and announced that good King Hagrid would give a feast a week from that day to all the beggars in the land. From far and near, hundreds of beggars came to partake of the king's bounty, and Hagrid stood among them, with his blind companions in the courtyard of the palace, waiting for His Majesty to appear. He knew the place well, and he hung his head and wept. "His Majesty will speak to each one of you who are his guests today," cried a herald, and one by one they passed into the palace and stood before the throne. When it came to be Hagrid's turn, he trembled so much that he had to be supported by the guards. The genie on the throne and Hagrid looked at each other. "Are you, too, a beggar?" said the genie. "No, gracious Majesty," answered Hagrid with bent head. "I have sinned grievously and have been punished. I am but the servant of a troop of blind beggars to whom I act as a guide." The genie king looked to his attendants and told them that he desired to be left alone with the beggar. Then he said, "Hagrid, I know thee. I see that thou hast repented. It is well. Now you may resume your rightful place as king." "Gracious Majesty," said Hagrid, "I have learned humility and wisdom. The throne is not for me. The blind beggars need me. Let me remain in their service." "I see that you are very penitent. The lesson is learned and my task is done. I will see that the blind beggars lack for nothing." With his own hands he placed the royal robes on Hagrid, and himself donned those of the beggar. When the attendants returned, they saw no difference. King Hagrid sat on the throne again, and nowhere in the whole world was there a monarch who ruled more wisely or showed more kindness and sympathy to all of his subjects. The end. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Bedtime Stories with the Abyss. Join us every Tuesday for another story of magic and fantasy. As you drift off to sleep, let the peace of the tallest mountain and the peace of the smallest stone be your peace. Let the stillness of the stars watch over you. Let not your thought, your dreams, or your daydreams disturb you. As sleep comes to your eyes and slumber to your eyelids, lie in peace, and let the music of nature lull you to sleep. Let you arise in peace. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time. Good night.